Hey, you are listening to the Victims and Villains podcast, a podcast extension of the nonprofit that creates content to educate and engage people on mental health awareness and suicide prevention through pop culture. My name is Captain Nostalgia, and joining me on this episode and the finale to Kevin Smith's Clerks trilogy is Mr. Alan Cram from You Have to Watch This Podcast and our Marvel department.
Snoochie Boochies.
Snoochie Boochies. So, real quick, man, because I kind of just want to go through, like, before we start talking about this final film, I want to talk about like what the first two films have kind of meant to us and kind of like what they've kind of how they've affected us, both as like cinephiles, but also at the same time, like as people.
Okay. Well, I was introduced to Kevin Smith probably around the time Jay and Silent Bob Strikes Back came out. And I didn't really understand his impact on the film industry until I got to college and started listening to one of his 20,000 podcasts and getting to know him as like a creator and commentator on things. And then I started going through all of his films, from Clerks through Mallrats all the way up to Clerks-iii, and I was like, okay, I get it now. Like, this guy, learning his story where he maxed out a credit card to make Clerks and was able to move into the Hollywood studio system and adapt his own way of filmmaking into making a career as a filmmaker. I was like, I respect this guy for that. A few years ago on You Have to Watch This Podcast, before Jay and Silent Bob Reboot came out, I had my co-host watch all of the view-askew movies for the first time. And in doing that, I realized that Clerks-2 really hit home for me at that time, because part of that film is Randall dealing with the fact that he's stuck in this job and people who he knows from high school look down on him in this position. At the time when we were going through that, I was working in retail and had kind of the same issues that Randall had. So it really struck home for me. And I rewatched them both this week in preparation for Clerks 3. And it's like, I still identify more with Clerks 2. I think they're both equally solid films. I think Clerks 1 has a bigger impact in the history of cinema. Clerks 2 is what it is. But it hit home for me, and it still kind of does, for where I was at that point in my life. So I was really looking forward to Clerks 3. What about you? What's your story?
So I got introduced to Kevin Smith through Dogma. Dogma was my entry point, and then, of course, came Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, and Clerks 2. Had never seen the first Clerks until August of this year. I came back from a con and was like, you know what? I want to check out Clerks, this blind spot that has been haunting me for years. And I feel like as like I was a kid, like I got the humor in Kevin Smith because like I watched everything with like work and like relationships in that movie just kind of went over my head. I was there for the donkey show.
Weird thing to admit.
Like, dude, I had like weird friends that in high school that were just kind of like, yeah, they pitched me on the idea of the donkey show. Like, this is the climax of this movie. And I was like, let's watch it. And I too like had gone back and like rewatched Clerks 2 in preparation for Clerks 3 and had forgotten so much about that movie. And like, much like you, man, like I spent 10 years in food service. I spent, 2 years in retail / customer service. Like that movie just like dug deep into me, so much deeper than I was anticipating on it being. And like, I think I feel the same way about you. Like, I really respect Clerks 1 for what it did for the movement of independent cinema in the greater landscape of filmmaking in the 90s, because I think that movie really changed the game for like up and coming voices in cinema, that like it's like, oh, like you can actually make something that is going to pay off and people are going to respond to it. Like there was a huge movement that followed Clerks in the 90s of independent cinema.
And I think, to his credit, Kevin Smith has always been a voice of inspiration for a lot of people. Like, you want to go make something, go make something. I don't think I would be into podcasting if it wasn't for Kevin Smith. I definitely use him as like, I just shot, I'm a filmmaker. I just shot a music video yesterday, and like going to see Clerks-iii the night before, I was like, yeah, let's do this. Like, let's get those creative juices flowing. And then, so yeah, Kevin, now my question for you is, have you ever met Kevin Smith personally?
I haven't. No.
Okay.
He did New York Comic Con one of the years that I was there, but his line was like astronomical.
Yeah.
So I've never done it, and I have not made the trip down to Red Bank to actually make it happen.
It's definitely worth waiting for to meet him, because he is the nicest celebrity I've ever met. Him and Jason Mewes both. I met them both separately, but Kevin Smith gives you the time. Like, he's excited to meet you. At least he comes off that way, and it's always a delight. Like I've gotten pictures with him. Jay Mewes is pretty cool too. And the Secret Stash in Red Bank, I haven't been to the new location yet, but it's definitely worth the trip. And now he has a movie theater opening, so I'm still gonna bug you about getting press passes for that film festival for us. So.
Which, I mean, feels like the natural like progression of someone like him, because I mean, he like is really interesting to consider, because he kind of made a career out of being a nerd. Like, yes, he's a filmmaker. Yes, he's a podcaster. But I mean, even more than that, like, he's, because of where he's at in his fandom and the impact he's had, like, I mean, he's written for characters like Batman and Daredevil and
Green Arrow and
Green Hornet, and like he's definitely like made his impact. So it seems like natural progression. It's like, all right, I'm a comic guy, I'm a film guy. So like, yeah.
Yeah, and with his shows like Fat Man Beyond and Hollywood Babylon, like he's commentating on pop culture as it happens too. So you get to hear his point of view on a lot of things, which will come into play later, because I have thoughts.
Well, let's jump into Clerks-iii. This is an interesting movie when you're talking in the grand scheme of Kevin Smith's career, because his career has been kind of interesting to look at the last few years, where he has essentially kind of gone from doing stoner comedies to like a period where he only did like horror and horror comedy, going back to stoner comedies, and then bringing out Clerks-iii.
Yeah, I mean, Clerks-iii, out of all of his films, I think is the most autobiographical. Because it deals with not only his heart attack that he had a few years ago, but also the creation of Clerks and the start of his career, and plays a lot into that. So I think this was a very personal story that he wanted to tell, and it definitely comes across as that.
Absolutely. So what are your spoiler-free thoughts on this movie?
I will start off by saying, and I hope this doesn't affect my opinion of the film, my experience seeing Clerks-iii was the worst cinematic experience I've had in my life, and not because of the film. I'll go in the details on that later. This film, I think, would have been better if I hadn't listened to Kevin Smith tell his stories 20,000 times on 5 different podcasts. It's very good. I think it does what he set out for it to do very well. I'm a bit annoyed at how much they ignored character growth from Clerks 2 that didn't seem to carry over into this. But I thought overall this was probably one of his stronger films overall. Like, it's definitely one of the strongest scripts in in the Clerks trilogy, I think.
Yeah, we'll rank the trilogy at the end of this episode, but like I'm right there with you, man. I think that this movie is without a doubt one of the stronger Kevin Smith movies that we've gotten. I don't listen to his podcast, so I'm not like hearing his story 5,000 times. But this movie, I will say, like, coming out of it, like, surprised the mess out of me. Like, from someone that grew up hearing Kevin Smith do dick jokes and stoner comedy, like, that's kind of like in my mind how I always like associate Kevin Smith when it comes to like writing these types of movies, especially like Clerks 2 is a great example because it balances drama, character growth, like balances all of these things really well.
And then a donkey show.
Yeah, and then a donkey show. And rewatching it as an adult, like it hits differently now that I've been in retail customer service food for, the last 10 plus years of my life. And this one, I feel like hits. It took me by off guard. Like I wasn't expecting to like come out of this movie almost teary eyed.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, it definitely got me in spots. Like, it probably would have gotten me more if it wasn't for my experience. But there were moments in this film that, like, even in the first act, I was like, "Oh wow, okay, we're getting there already. Okay, let's do this." And I was getting teary eyed. But yeah, it's a very funny film that still hits you in the heartstrings very well. So,
and I think it's that emotional core that really helps make it one of Smith's best films to date. So this is your official spoiler warning for Clerks 3 if you guys haven't seen it. I guess at this point, wait for the convenience store to come near you or wait for the video release. But we are going to make sure that you guys subscribe to this podcast, come back after you guys have seen Clerks 3 because we're going to jump into all of this. But yeah, so the first thing I want to hear about what made this such a terrible experience for you. I'm so curious. So
the way Kevin Smith, if you're listening and aren't familiar with the way Kevin Smith has been releasing his last few movies, is he does tours, which works for him because he gets the audience to come out and sells out every show where he does a Q&A and shows the movie beforehand. So you get to see him, you get to see the movie. In conjunction with that, they do Fathom events. And for Jay and Silent Bob Reboot, it was a 2-night event. For Clerks 3, it was a week-long event. Like every night for the past week, you could see Clerks 3 in theaters around the country at 7 o'clock p.m. The theater I went to, I haven't gone to in a while. It's not one that I frequent. And they don't usually do Fathom events, so I was kind of surprised that they were showing Clerks 3. But I was already in that area for an event that day, so I was like, you know what? I'll just kill some time in town and then go see the movie in Carlisle. Like, I'll be fine. Right off the get-go, I knew I was in trouble because but I had a lot of time to kill, so I ended up seeing Top Gun Maverick before it. So I went out to get my drink refilled, and as I did that, a guy in a movie shirt came out and talked to the managers. Like, there's a cricket in Theater 4 where they were showing Clerks 3. I was like, well, that's not good. So they go in. When I get into the theater, the manager and employee are at the wall trying to find this cricket. And after about 5 minutes, they give up. And the manager's just like, We can't find the cricket. It seems to have gone inside the wall. But if it ruins your movie experience tonight, let us know and you will get a rain check. And I was like, well, a rain check's not going to do me any good because I can't come back and see this. So I had to wait it out because I knew I was doing this podcast. At the end of the movie, somebody in the theater just yelled out, "That was the loudest damn cricket I've ever heard in my life." Throughout the whole movie, it just kept getting louder and louder. And there are moments in this where you want it to be quiet and like it's meant to be quiet. But when you just have the chirping of a cricket over it, it just it took me out of it so much. I was livid when I left that theater. And on top of that, the theater had the top and bottom of the screens not lined up right for the Fathom event. So like when the Fathom stuff was playing beforehand, like the text at the top and bottom was cut off. And I was like, this is not going to be lined up right. And the whole framing of the movie was off. And I said something to them about that when I got my refund at the end, because I was like, or when I got my rain check, because like I'm never going back there for a Fathom event, if any movie ever. Like I'll probably use my rain check for something, but I think I'm done with that theater now.
Dang, that sucks, man.
I almost tweeted to Kevin Smith about it. Like, dude, if you're gonna do this Fathom event stuff, make sure that they use theaters that know what they're doing.
Yeah, dude, that sucks, man. I'm so sorry. It's like my Quiet Place, the theater experience. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it is what it is. Like I'm trying not to let it sour my thoughts on the film, but it's kind of hard. Like when there are moments in this where it gets serious and gets dark and deep, and like I wanted to feel what he wanted me to feel, and I couldn't because there Jiminy Cricket's in the corner, like trying to hide from Disney Plus's Pinocchio. So.
Well, yeah. So this movie is really. Do you want to talk about the cameos in this one first?
I mean, yeah, the ones that weren't spoiled in the trailer, I guess.
So I didn't watch a trailer for this one, so I didn't realize some of the faces that were in this. Mm-hmm. But for those of you guys that don't know, or if you kept listening past the spoiler warning, there's a montage of actors in this movie that are auditioning to be in Randall's movie. And I mean, it's everyone from Melissa Benoist to Ben Affleck to Sarah Michelle Gellar and Freddie Prinze Jr.
And not to mention all four Impractical Jokers are auditioning as well. Which was nice to see because Kevin Smith and Brian Q from Impractical Jokers have a long history. Like in high school, Brian Quinn started working for View-Askew Pictures, and Kevin Smith, and they've been close ever since.
Did you have a favorite cameo in this one?
Oh man, the Ben Affleck one went a little too long for me. Since I listened to all his podcasts, it's always nice seeing his co-host show up. And Lando at the end of the film, towards the end of the film, who's there with a reporter and his wife, was played by Mark Bernardin, his co-host on Fat Man Beyond. And I knew he had no lines going into it because they kept making jokes about it on the show. But just seeing him standing there and nod and just get berated by his wife was fun. Ralph Garman was in there doing his Pacino and Schwarzenegger impressions. I think it's just nice seeing the normal players for a Kevin Smith thing, though. All the comic book men are there playing hockey, and then they're in a scene at the end as well. So, how about you? What was your favorite cameo?
Honestly, I really liked Ben Affleck in this one. I thought that it was. I always like. I know the history of kind of their falling out, so when he shows up in Reboot, I really liked it. He probably had my favorite scene in Reboot, and I loved his character in this. It's if you look on the IMDb, almost every person is listed as auditioner, but he's listed as Boston John, and I just thought that was so funny. He had, and it's Also, too, like it's nice to kind of see him do comedy because I feel like over the last like 5-6 years, like he's either done like straight dramas or Batman. So it's like it was nice to kind of see him do something out of character for him.
Yeah. I mean, I like seeing him and Ben Affleck work together. I think the joke just went on a little too long for me, but that also could just be the cricket thing. Like like at that point, during that point, I know it got louder and I was like, this is, oh man. So I know that took me out of it there. But yeah, I enjoyed all of those cameos. I really want to see them do another comedy together. Like we just did Jersey Girl on You Have to Watch This podcast last week.
Underrated.
Completely underrated. And I am very excited for the prospect of Kevin Smith showing his director's cut at his movie theater once it opens. Because you can tell that they took the Kevin Smith out of that movie. But I think Ben Affleck gives a great performance in that, and I would love to see them do another comedy together.
Yeah, Jersey Girl's interesting because like it like capitalized at first on like the hype of Ben-affleck, and then Geely like bombed, like tanked completely. And they were like, you know what? We need to like re-edit this, like, because I remember there was like press coming out about them like redoing like edits of Jersey Girl.
Yeah, there was a lot of press around it, and that if you haven't watched Jersey Girl recently, I think it's definitely worth watching in 2022 because there were things in it like Ben-affleck that aged pretty well for that movie. And are like add a sense of humor, add joke, like there are jokes added to it now, like with the theatrical version of it that are funnier in 2022 than they were in 2004, just because of the world that is Ben Affleck's life and just Hollywood in general.
Yeah,
we talk all about it on You Have to Watch This podcast. Go check
it out. And so outside of the auditions, I mean, you also have like Justin Long plays a nurse. He probably had one of my favorite sequences in this movie because like he's essentially the nurse that is assigned to shave Randall's pubic groin because but he like goes on like has like a monologue about like how he is like loves his job and stuff like that and does like what kind of accent was he doing? Because like I couldn't place it.
I don't know. I couldn't tell either. It was a weird one.
Like a New Hampshire one or like a northern dialect is kind of what it seems like. It wasn't quite Boston, but it felt like it belonged in that region.
Maybe it was like a Rhode Island, like a Peter Griffin type thing.
Yeah. True.
So can we talk about that whole Randall's heart attack sequence? Sure. Because this is part of the reason. Like, I get why this story was told this way because it's beat for beat what happened to Kevin Smith when he had his heart attack. Because he's told that story verbatim many times, and I don't know if it's just because he appears on every podcast I seem to listen to, but I've heard that story several times. So I was like, okay, I know what's going to happen. They're gonna try to shave his groin now, and he's gonna talk about like how he's upset that he has a small penis, and like. I was like, I knew every beat that was coming from that story, down to the name of the doctor. Like the doctor's name is the same, Dr. Guggenheim, played by Amy Sedaris in this. So I get why he does that, because not everyone knows, like not everyone listens to his podcast and knows his story, and I think it's important to tell your story the way you want to tell it. And he did add some jokes to it, so it was something a little bit different for everyone. If it was any longer of a sequence, I think I would have been annoyed by it, but it was just the right amount of length to get us into the bulk of the movie.
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you were someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below, wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.
Yeah, it's like it did that scene, like, again, not having like really any connections to Kevin Smith's like podcast universe. I've listened to his podcast like a handful of times, and like even going into this, like I'd completely forgotten that he had a heart attack a few years ago. It wasn't until like I was watching like an interview with him like later on, I was like, oh yeah, that's right. I remember like him tweeting out like, you know, hey, I just had a heart attack. I'm okay though. And, you know, I think the energy as they're operating between Sedaris and Anderson was really well done. I loved the back and forth with like her trying to connect to Randall to like make it feel peace, like was really great. I love the scene where like they're talking about superheroes and she completely gets the publications mixed up.
Yeah, my favorite thing about that scene is he's talking about the Mandalorian, and Amy Sedaris is in the Mandalorian. So it just added another level of humor there.
Is she? Who does she play?
She is the woman on Tatooine who always fixes the ship.
Okay, all right. I thought she like looked familiar, but like I couldn't place her face.
Yep, that's her.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So the one thing that surprised me about the heart attack sequence in the hospital didn't have anything to do with Randall. It had to do with Dante, because they established pretty early on in this film that since we had last seen them in a Clerks film, so back in 2006, his fiance has died, and died almost immediately after the events of Clerks 2. They killed off Becky, the Rosario Dawson character.
How did you feel about that? Because I had like a love-hate relationship with that.
I do too. I'm of two minds of it. The one is I get why they had to do that, because you're not going to get Rosario Dawson for this whole thing. So budgetary wise, like you're not going to have her there for the scenes that if she was his wife, she wouldn't be there for the scenes that she should be there for. On the other hand, they fridge her. They fridge Becky to give Dante a story. And I have a lot of problems with that because her death only is to serve his story. Yeah,
that's the aspect that I really had problems with. But again, I understand where you're coming from too.
Yeah. And at the same time, like, they could have done it a lot worse, but they did make her a part of the film. She is there to talk to him. And does provide insight to everything going on in moments. And I think her scenes are my favorite ones in the film. They're the ones that got me emotionally. Like the scene at the graveyard, like that's in the first act of the film almost. And it was like a complete tone shift from all of the filmmaking stuff before it, after the heart attack. And I really enjoyed her part in it. But it's hard to think that he didn't fridge her. But and Kevin Smith has called out other films for doing the same thing. And I think it does a better, like the one example I found online was back when Deadpool 2 came out, he called them out for fridging Vanessa in that, Deadpool's girlfriend. But I think this film does a better job of keeping that character in the film and being part of the story. Because when you get to the end of it, I think everything that happened with Dante and Becky plays into Dante's relationship with Randall more, especially at the very end. And it has a lot to say about the relationship between Dante and Randall more than anything.
Yeah, I feel like that's probably my biggest complaint about this movie is the way that they handle the Rosario Dawson character. Because, like, again, like you had said, like, you're not going to get her for the entire movie. I mean, and literally in the last 16 years, I mean, her star has risen.
Yeah.
Very spectacularly.
Yeah, the fact that they got her at all when she's doing Ahsoka it was a miracle. Because I didn't think she would be in the movie to begin with.
Yeah. And so, like, I understand the purpose of that, but, like, they really, really, like, demean kind of her character because, like you said, like, it just kind of seems like she doesn't really have a purpose here except to, like, propel Dante or to, like, give, like, Dante's story. And so she's very, like, one note. So, like, it helps connect. I think some of the emotional beats of this movie, like the scene in the end where, like, Dante has the heart attack and dies, and like you got to see, like, they're doing it like a movie theater, like that. I was like, okay, like the graveyard scene, like I really liked, but, like, also at the same time, like I don't know, like just have fridging her, like you keep saying, like is just. It was such a weird narrative choice. It
is a weird choice, but I will say this, like, as much as I think that she was a bit fridged in this, I don't think she's one note. I think she's still the same character that we had in Clerks 2. Like, they talk about her not believing in romantic love. And I think it's a very, like, from a different point of view, like if you take away that the way she's used a la fridging, I think it's a very interesting way to show trauma through Dante. Like, he has all of these experiences. Like, when he's back in the hospital, he sees her coming in on the gurney. When they go back to movies, he has the moment, like, he hasn't been in there since. Like, it's a very interesting way to show trauma. And like that is just to develop his story more for the film, but I think it's a good use of the limited time they had with Rosario Dawson. So I'm still torn on it. Like, I'm very interested to see if anyone asks Kevin Smith about it in one of his Q&As and see what he says. Because I know, like, people he's around a lot are probably better writers than him, and probably have gave him notes on this. And I'm sure this is a lot better than what originally was written. And I think if you don't have Rosario Dawson, but you still want her to be a part of the film, I think this was probably the only way they could go about that. And even though I have issues with it, it is what it is.
That's fair. And, like, you brought up trauma. I think that, like, you know, speaking about that, how, you know, different sites and, like, being in places really do affect and kind of re-trigger a lot of those sadder memories or, things that might, trigger depression within the scale of mental health is done really well. The movie's sequence in particular is really heartbreaking, and also like at the same time, like it's then the hospital as well. Like it's a good introduction, and I think they plant these seeds really well about what happens, and then in the finale, or I guess in the climax of the movie, where right before Dante has his heart attack, you have them mention that not only Becky but also their young child, which if the events of Clerks II take place in our real time, you have to imagine that that child was very young.
The way I read it, Clerks II came out in 2006. Her memorial poster says 2006. I don't think she ever had the baby. I think the child died with her. Or she died in a drunk driving accident. Like drunk driver hit her. So either she was still pregnant or she had the baby in the car. Yeah. Either way, and I think tragic.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way because, like, I feel like the idea of a character experiencing the loss of drunk driving is something that we just don't either see or we don't talk about a whole lot. And so I think it makes it that much more impactful when you're talking specifically about the trauma of Dante in this, and kind of how certain characters, whether certain sequences, whether it's movies or, going to her grave or, having to relive these moments that Randall has written in this script, I think is also it's a brutally honest way that, while yes, it is propelling this character's emotional step forward, it is also at the same time a very, very sad very sad but very true look at what trauma can do.
Yeah.
So
and the one thing I think is, like, from Randall's point of view, like, post his heart attack, he is all about, I want to tell my story. This is about me. Like, you're a side character. Like, you're not even a side character. Like, he's so, in true Randall fashion, has such an overinflated ego about himself. And I think that's one thing that has carried over throughout the 3 Clerks films. Like, he's so full of himself, he doesn't realize what's going on around him. You get a little bit less of that at the end of Clerks 2, but by the time you get here, he's back to his old ways again. And I think it really does a good job of building up the tension between the two of them, between Dante and Randall, throughout the whole film.
Now, you had mentioned earlier about, like, how some of the character growth from Clerks 2 doesn't carry over into Clerks 3. Is that some of what you're talking about?
Yeah, like, because at the end of it, like, he's like, you're my best friend. I don't want you to move to Florida. What am I without you? And he kind of, like, they reopen the Quick Stop, and once they're working the Quick Stop again, like, post his heart attack, he's like, I want to tell my story. Like, forgetting that he's been there the whole time. And just, like, focusing on the me of it all, the Randall of it all, and making Dante relive every moment of their life at the Quick Stop is it's a little jarring if you look at the Randall at the end of Clerks 2.
Yes, but we've also had time pass, and I think that in certain ways, like, I will say that, like, from someone that has been married for a long time, like, there are certain habits that I had in the beginning of my marriage that I no longer have, but there have been times in my marriage where I've reverted back to those old habits, or I broke them very briefly, but they kept going. And I think that's kind of the same way that we see with Randall, is that Randall has this crisis in his life at the end of Clerks 2, changes, but then reverts back. And I think that that's kind of what you see. And let me just clarify this too, because, like, when I when I was like probably like 7 or 8, my dad had actually gotten a bypass surgery on his stomach. And the scene where the doctor is like, talking to Dante, and she's like, just so you know, for Randall, like, he's going to like bring it up a whole lot, and like he's going to be depressed, just be here for him. Like, and the scene right where they kind of have this like big explosion in the end of the movie, and he's like, oh yeah, you almost died. You've only told me that, 100 million times. Right after my dad had that surgery, man, my dad, it actually became like a running joke in our family that like, my dad like wouldn't do anything because he'd be like, oh, I can't do X, Y, or Z because I just had surgery. So like anytime like he would, for like years, like still now, like he would just kind of be like surgery. And like that. So like seeing elements of that, like I was like, this just seems too familiar.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think they do a good job of foreshadowing everything that happens in this movie's third act early on in the film. Like the doctor says, you're next if you don't change your lifestyle. And then they're like, you die in the third act. He's like, what if there's a sequel? There's not going to be a sequel. Like they do a really good job of hinting that Dante is going to die. And I didn't think they were going to kill Dante. Because I like right before this, I saw Top Gun Maverick, and no one dies in that. Spoilers. Like they make you think someone dies, but Tom Cruise doesn't die in any movie. But so I was like, okay, yeah, they're not gonna actually kill Dante. Then they did, and I was like, shit. And I think they did a very good job of playing death in this movie, like showing his death.
It's really interesting too, because like they talk about it early in the movie when Randall has his heart attack that, only 80% of, 80% of people, like they don't make it out. Like 20% of the people that have this type of heart attack do, or don't make it out alive. I got that backwards. But he talks about like, how like that's kind of why you get that a lot of that stuff in this movie, and I honestly didn't think they were going to do it either, but the fact that they did, I feel like propelled this movie just to like new heights and really crashed the emotional core. Like when Randall gives up to give the eulogy at the end, and he says the line, you're not even supposed to be here today. Like calling back to the first Clerks, like, man, like I almost wept. Like it's such a heavy moment. It's like, it's a great callback, but also at the same time, like, damn.
Yeah. And I think moments like that are why Jeff Anderson signed on to this movie. Because for a while there, Clerks-iii wasn't going to happen because Jeff Anderson refused to come back as Randall. But then him and Kevin Smith reunited and were able to like mend some bridges that were burned at one point and talk it out like post heart attack about Clerks-iii and what the story could be. And then Jeff Anderson was on board and we got the film. So I think because it gave Randall so much to do in this emotionally that you didn't get to see in Clerks 2 or 1 even, I think is why they told the story they did.
Yeah, and I am really, really glad that they are that they brought it back, because like that was one of the things that I read afterwards where like that was the holdup for so long, was that the two of them essentially had to bury the hatchet. And I was like, dang, like, knowing that this almost didn't happen, I feel like feels like such a travesty, because, one of the things that I was talking about people, some friends online with after I went back and revisited Clerks 2 last week was, I feel like this movie just kind of just doesn't get like, it's not in the conversation enough when it comes to like early 2000s comedies. And I think with this and kind of concluding chapter of it, like this trilogy is worthy of like being in like the conversation with alongside of like Godfather, Toy Story, Spider-Man, Dark Knight trilogy as literally like one of the best trilogies we've seen.
Yeah, I think so too. When's this episode dropping?
It's Wednesday.
Okay. Well, this Friday, as part of the Victims live stream, we're actually going to be talking, like my show is talking about trilogies because of this. And I think there is an argument to be made that Clerks 3 is one of the stronger trilogies of the last 20 years.
You got my vote.
Yeah. That being said, do you think there will be more entries into the view-askewniverse?
I have to hope so, because we're what 45 minutes into this episode. Like we also haven't talked about Jay and Silent Bob yet.
Yeah.
I definitely feel like there's a lot more conversations to take place in this one, and they kind of leave it open for like a fourth film, but I don't know necessarily that I would want to see a Elias and Randall movie. I just don't feel like it hits the same.
I mean, I don't think there will be a Clerks 4. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, if there is a Clerks 4, then Disney has bought out the view-askewniverse and paid Kevin Smith all the money. That being said, I think there will definitely be more stories featuring these characters. Like, I'm sure maybe we'll see Randall or Elias again, but we'll definitely see Jay and Silent Bob, because I know they've been teased for some other projects in the future. So,
well, let's talk about the remaining characters, so to say, of this movie that we haven't really talked about. And also, like, this movie has so many great callbacks. We talked about it originally with the funeral scene, but like also like you have Dante's girlfriend from the first film comes back in this one. His ex-fiance from the second one comes back. And then also at the same time, like, I think it's funny also too that Harley Quinn Smith in this movie has played every time that she's cast in one of her dad's movies, she plays a clerk. I just thought that was so funny.
I mean, in my mind, she's still playing Millie from Reboot, and she just gets a job at the quick stop. So, yeah. And I think the film does a very good job of being meta about the indie filmmaker stuff, because they talk about like the whole, we need to shoot this in black and white thing. Like, that's just Kevin Smith justifying why he shot it in black and white. Like, he goes the artistic route. Like, anyone who looks at these walls can tell that the only way they will look good is in black and white. Where in reality it was colored film cost more, and so we're just going to shoot this in black and white because it's cheaper.
Yeah. But I liked his explanation, like, of why he did it, because like it's like very thought out, very like methodical, and like even like bringing in, it's like, yeah, the audience is going to be like looking at this as if they're watching the security camera footage.
Yeah, and then there's a whole thing where he's like reflecting on jokes that they made in Clerks 1 that didn't age well, like the Asian design major. Like they talk like kind of making fun of how that stuff doesn't play out well today, but not apologizing for it. Like saying, yeah, that's not cool now, but it is what it is, which I think is an entirely valid point. Like, you can't go back and change the past, but you can at least acknowledge that it was in the wrong.
I'm just glad that they didn't decide to go the route of revisiting the scene from Clerks 2 with Wanda Sykes, because that in a post BLM world does not age well.
No, it does not. No, it does not. That's one of the cringiest parts of. If I have a big complaint about Clerks 2, is that joke goes on too much, goes on too long,
way too much. And then it's like a running gag with Randall throughout the entire rest of the film. I was like, why?
Yeah. And I think they did a good job of recreating moments from Clerks. Getting some, they get a lot of the actors back from Clerks to play the same roles that they played in Randall's film. So,
which I don't know if you actually stayed after the Fathom events. They did like a 20-minute like making of like short documentary that they showed. Did you stay for that?
I did not. I was pissed. I was like, I need to get out of here. Like I didn't know there was anything after the movie. I might have stayed, but I was also so livid. I was like, I need to get out of here.
No, I understand that. So he talks about like actually like the challenges of like hunting down and like finding those actors, because like they're not actors by trade. Like they just happen to be friends. And so like that also like gave me so much more respect for him as a filmmaker, that he's like, you know what? We're going to recapture the original Clerks, but we're going to do it in the same spot. Like he talked about the process of like going through and like filming in Jersey, filming at the Quick Stop location, like how he like reconnected and stuff like that. And I just really admired like his like hustle of a filmmaker to make this movie.
Yeah. No, I wish I would have seen that, but I wasn't in the mood for a documentary at that point.
I understand.
I'll check it out when I'm sure it'll be on the Blu-ray. So
I hope it will be. Let's jump into Jay and Silent Bob, because we haven't talked about them, and it's also worth mentioning that Jay and Silent Bob essentially like front Randall and Dante the money at the end of Clerks 2 to rebuy the Quick Stop, and so now they've kind of turned our ST Video into a dispensary, but I've still left the videos and the VHS tapes in the dispensary, which was an interesting choice. But they're like hustling outside too as well.
How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.
I mean, it's kind of like what happens to the drug dealer when drug dealing becomes legal. Like you have a way of doing things. You want to keep it the same so that like they're used to being outside. So they just do their business outside. So, and I thought the VHS tape cases as like the method of carrying the medicinal marijuana was interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I really liked that. I also thought like there was the scene where they're in they're like getting permission to run to shoot at the RST, and he's like, oh wait, I got something to give to him. He brings out this like VHS tape, and he's like, how much do I owe you for late fees kind of thing. Like they're trying to like calculate it, and I don't know. How do you feel like the movie used Jay and Silent Bob in this movie?
I feel like it was it wasn't their story. Like you have movies like Reboot to tell a Jay and Silent Bob story. I think they were just in this enough. I don't think we had too little of them. I don't think we had too much of them. I think they were there to serve their purpose. They are the R2 and 3PO of the view-askewniverse. So I think they used them fairly well. But yeah, I thought I was happy with how much of them we got.
Yeah, I feel like you said, like they were in it just enough. Like if the movie needed to like break tension or you needed a laugh, like Jay and Silent Bob were excellent for that. Probably one of the funniest scenes is when they were trying to shoot the dance sequence in front of RST, and Jay wouldn't actually work unless like everyone got off the set because he didn't want to be embarrassed. Like, that was really funny. I thought like Randall going to Jay and Silent Bob and you know, talking about on behalf of Dante. They're like, what? His name's Dante? Like, who's Dante? Like, great scene.
Yeah. No, absolutely. The one what did you think about Elias's role in this one?
I thought it was really interesting. Because like as someone that is a Christian and knows that like God doesn't always answer us in like the time when we want, like it teaches patience, and like there's a whole like section of the Bible that talks about like how like perseverance like builds character and stuff like that. I thought that was really interesting. They did such a funny. To me, I think it was just kind of like him essentially coming back into this role, kind of being almost like how Malcolm McDowell approached doing Rob Zombie's Halloween duology, where you have him compared to Donald Pleasance in the first film. And when they came back for the second one, McDowell was like, you know, I'm not going to return unless you make this character different and kind of show a different side of him that we hadn't seen before. And that's what we got. And I think that that's kind of how they brought this one forward. I thought it was really funny how he also got his own Jay and Silent Bob, or he also got his own Silent Bob in this movie, but he didn't really bring anything to the screen. And that I felt like, that kind of seemed like a missed opportunity. I
mean, visually he did. I think the best thing about his character was the different looks every scene that he was in. I think it's interesting to take a devout Christian character like he was in Clerks II, have him say something like God smite Randall for me, and then Randall has a heart attack, and then like I think that having him react to that the way he did was the most interesting. It just went on too long. Like I was expecting him to come back around by the end of the film, and we never got there.
Yeah, it definitely kind of seems like coming back to like the Wanda Sykes sequence from Clerks II. Like it's a scene that like it's funny for like a moment or two, but definitely comes back like it goes on way too long.
Yeah, and I definitely think they're like it's not his movie, but I think there was definitely potential to tell a story there about that. And who knows, maybe that's something else Kevin Smith has in the pipeline. This is the guy who made Dogma, so I'm sure he has other faith-based stories that he wants to tell, and maybe that's something that he does in the future. If we do see these characters again, maybe that's part of it.
I would really like that, because again, like Elias was a good side character in Clerks II. I don't necessarily feel that way about him in Clerks III, to where like even adding on the Silent Bob knockoff character, like you said, like visually it works really well because I think that they did a lot of interesting things with his wardrobe and his fashion designs, but it just kind of feels really hollow outside of that.
Yeah. I will say the one thing with his Silent Bob character is at the end of the funeral, Millie, the Harley Quinn Smith character, like gives him a look and they like flirt back and forth a little bit. That's her real life boyfriend who lived with Kevin Smith.
Really?
Who lived with Kevin Smith and his wife. Like when they were in New Jersey filming the thing, I think he lived with Kevin Smith. Like they all got
Oh,
a
that's
house together.
amazing.
He was like part of that. Like it was him, Kevin Smith's wife, and Jason Mewes.
That's amazing. I really love that.
Yeah.
But I don't know, man. Is there anything else that you feel like this film like touched on or like did before we give ratings?
I think just like any other Kevin Smith film, it has a fantastic soundtrack. I knew the film opened with Black Parade, and I was really curious to see how that played out. And I thought think it was a great song for the opening. I thought, like knowing Kevin Smith, the Degrassi theme song during the heart attack surgery was interesting. Because that's the song that he was singing in his head, like when he had the heart attack. Whatever it takes, I know I can make it through. Like that was what it was going on in his head during the heart attack. So, Kevin Smith is a huge Degrassi fan. So,
interesting. Yeah, I don't know. This movie for me, like I knew it was going to be good starting out on MC. Like, I honestly couldn't believe that they started out on Welcome to the Black Parade. Like, I've never seen that song be used in a movie. And I think it's appropriate for this movie. And I was really surprised that they did the full 5 minutes.
Yeah, especially in hindsight, like knowing how the film ends, like that's a perfect song for it because.
Come to think of it, I don't think I've ever heard My Chemical Romance in any movie.
I think it helps that Kevin Smith and Gerard Way are friends.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
he's been on a few podcasts with him talking about like Umbrella Academy and stuff. So
the also too, like you talked about the Degrassi theme song. Like I was like, as I was like sitting there watching the credits, I was like, I've heard this song before. Why can't I place it? And then it came up in the end credits, and I was like, why? But you telling me that like that's what his like was in his head makes a lot more sense now.
Well, yeah, Kevin Smith and Jason Mewes were both in an episode of Degrassi.
Really?
Yeah, they do a Jay and Silent Bob go to Canada thing, and they film it at Degrassi High.
Put this up right now.
Not only that, Drake brought them in for a music video a few years ago. When they reunited the Degrassi cast, they brought in Jay and Silent Bob. So
this is very weird to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I grew up watching Degrassi, and I just, anyways, yeah. So I think let's go ahead and give this a Rorschach rating scale 0 to 5. Where does this one land for you?
I think if I'm gonna the theater experience, it's a 0.5, but that's not because of the movie. But the film itself, I'll give it a 4.
All right, I'm gonna go a little higher than you and say a 4.5. This movie, I didn't have that theater experience, and
you're lucky.
This movie,
you're lucky.
I think this movie just is a brilliant blend of comedy and drama, and also kind of harkens really well on, you know, things like trauma, but also like mortality and depression. And you know, I think that Kevin Smith, this is probably one of the best scripts he's written in a long time. Not to say that like I didn't like Tusk or Reboot or, you know, but I feel like there's something really special about this, and this movie being the end of a trilogy really brings Clerks as one of the best trilogies into the conversation. Yeah.
And I'm really excited to see what he does next, because I know his next movie is something completely different. So
yeah, he's what, trying to do Tusk 2 next, right?
No, that's not next. So he bought the movie theater in New Jersey as he slowly becomes the Dolly Parton of Jersey Shore. He bought a movie theater, and he's like, well, since I own a movie theater, I'm going to shoot a movie in a movie theater. So his next movie is called The 430 Movie. It takes place in the 80s. I think he co-wrote it with his daughter. and they film it next summer. So that'll be next.
Interesting. So,
and then it's going to be Tusks.
yeah, because I was about to say, I was like, I thought that I had read somewhere that they were going to. Now, is that? I mean, this might be like offhand, but is Tusks supposed to be the conclusion to the True North trilogy, or is this just something that they're like?
I think this is
doing.
I don't know if Moose Jaws is ever going to happen. I want it to happen still. Tusks, I don't think is the end of the True North stuff because of Moose Jaws, but it's a direct sequel to it. Like Justin Long and Haley Joel Osment and everyone's coming back except for Michael Parks because he passed away. But from what Kevin Smith talked about with the story, I'm like, I'd see that. Like, I would definitely go see that movie. So,
yeah, Tusk is a very weird, uncomfortable experience.
It is, and it sounds like it's going to get even weirder and more uncomfortable. So,
I'm here for it though. So A24, bring it to break this like Fathom event thing that he's got going on. Because that was my biggest complaint about this one is that like I got out of this one and I've had a few theater experiences this year where I'm like, I want to see this again, and that was my experience with this one was like, but I gotta wait till it comes on Blu-ray, so I'm like saddened by that.
Yeah, because you just missed he was in Richmond last week.
Yeah, so he was in Richmond the day that I was actually on vacation in another town. So but I think that's gonna do it for us. If you guys have seen Clerks 3, what did you guys think? Make sure that you guys tweet to us and let us know. Alan, where can people follow you online?
People can follow me on You Have to Watch This Podcast on all major podcasting platforms. We're also on Instagram at You Have to Watch This Pod, Twitch and YouTube. We stream live every Tuesday, and our episodes are available to download on podcasting apps every Wednesday.
You guys can follow me. I am on Letterboxd at Captain Nostalgia. I'm also on TikTok at Gent, Gent, Ghostface. And you guys can follow me on Letterboxd. You guys can follow our parent company, Victims and Villains. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, as well as Patreon as well, and wherever you guys follow your podcasting, get your podcast from. So after you guys subscribe, you have to watch this podcast. Make sure that you guys subscribe to us, and have a good day, guys.
Snooch.
Snoochy boochies.